The iron shackles cut into Diana's wrists as the stagecoach rattled over the dusty Texas road, each jolt sending fresh waves of pain through her already bruised body. She had been a mail-order bride once, responding to an advertisement placed by a rancher named Vernon Lancaster in Shafter, Texas, dreaming of a new life far from the Boston tenements where she had grown up alone and desperate. That dream had died the moment she stepped off the train in El Paso 3 days ago, when instead of meeting her intended husband, she had been grabbed by rough hands and dragged into a back alley. The man who emerged from the shadows called himself Marcus Doyle, and he claimed Vernon Lancaster had sold her contract to him to pay off gambling debts. She did not believe him, not entirely, but the shackles on her wrists and the gun at her back had been convincing enough to force her compliance. Now, as the stagecoach carried her toward an uncertain fate, Diana pressed her face against the dusty window and watched the harsh landscape roll past. The year was 1878, and Texas stretched endless and unforgiving under a relentless sun. Scrub, brush, and mesquite trees dotted the brown earth, and in the distance, mountains rose like jagged teeth against the brilliant blue sky. She had turned 22 just last month, celebrated alone in her tiny room in Boston with stale bread and weak tea, hoping that her future would be brighter. Instead, she found herself bound and helpless, being transported like cargo to a man who saw her as property. Marcus Doyle sat across from her in the coach, his yellowed teeth visible through his constant grin. He was perhaps 40, with greasy hair and eyes that lingered too long on her body despite the plain gray dress she wore. 2 other men rode with them, both armed, both silent. They had been traveling for hours, and Diana's throat ached with thirst, but she refused to beg. She had learned early in life that showing weakness only invited more cruelty. "We will be stopping soon," Marcus said, leaning forward. "There is a ranch just outside Shafter where we can water the horses. You will behave yourself, or I will add leg irons to those pretty wrists of yours." Diana met his gaze steadily, refusing to look away. "Where are you taking me?" "To your new home, sweetheart. I have a place west of here, past the Chinati Mountains. You will keep house, cook, clean, and whatever else I require. That contract you signed made you property of Vernon Lancaster, and he signed you over to me fair and square." "I signed a contract to be a wife, not a slave," Diana said, her voice shaking despite her effort to sound strong. "This is illegal." Marcus laughed, a sound like gravel scraping metal. "Out here, the law is what a man makes it. Vernon Lancaster does not care what happens to you. He got his money, and I got what I paid for." Before Diana could respond, the stagecoach lurched to a sudden stop. Shouts erupted outside, followed by the sharp crack of gunfire. Marcus swore and reached for his pistol, but the door flew open before he could draw it. Diana caught a glimpse of a tall figure silhouetted against the bright afternoon sun, and then everything happened at once. The 2 armed men tried to raise their weapons, but shots rang out, sharp and precise. Neither man got off a single round before they slumped in their seats, blood blooming across their chests. Marcus made a desperate grab for Diana, trying to use her as a shield, but a large hand caught his wrist and twisted hard. The sound of bone breaking was sickeningly loud in the confined space. Marcus screamed and fell back, cradling his shattered wrist. "Get out," said a deep voice, rough as sandpaper but somehow not unkind. "Get out and start walking east. If I see you in this territory again, I will kill you." Marcus scrambled from the coach, his face pale with pain and fear. Through the open door, Diana saw him stumble into the dirt and then take off running, disappearing into the brush like a kicked dog. She sat frozen, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. The man who had saved her stepped into view, and Diana found herself staring at the most striking face she had ever seen. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and a lean, muscular build that spoke of years of hard work. His hair was dark brown, almost black, and hung just past his collar beneath a wide-brimmed hat. His eyes were an unusual shade of gray-green, like sage in morning light, and they studied her with an intensity that made her breath catch. A few days' worth of stubble shadowed his strong jaw, and there was a scar that ran from his right eyebrow to his hairline, a thin white line that somehow only made him more compelling. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his gaze dropping to the shackles on her wrists. Diana shook her head, not trusting her voice. The man holstered his gun and reached for the chains, examining the locks. He pulled a small kit from his pocket, selected a thin piece of metal, and began working on the first lock with surprising gentleness. His hands were large and calloused, the hands of someone who worked with them daily, but his touch was careful as he maneuvered around her bruised wrists. "This might take a minute," he said quietly. "These are good locks." "Who are you?" Diana managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. "Vernon Lancaster," he said, and the first lock sprang open with a soft click. He moved to the second shackle. "I placed an advertisement for a mail-order bride about 6 months ago. When you did not arrive on the expected train 2 weeks ago, I made inquiries. Found out Marcus Doyle had intercepted you in El Paso, claiming I had sold your contract to cover debts." "You didn't?" Diana asked, though she could see the answer in his face. "No, madam. I do not gamble, and I do not deal in human lives like they are cattle." The second lock opened, and the shackles fell away. Vernon caught them before they could clatter to the floor, his movements smooth and practiced. He set them aside and then looked at her wrists, his jaw tightening at the sight of the raw, reddened skin. "We need to get those cleaned and bandaged." Diana pulled her hands back, tucking them against her chest. "Why did you save me? That contract I signed, it is not legal, is it? I understand now that those arrangements mean nothing out here. You could have just let him take me and found another bride." Vernon was quiet for a long moment, his gray-green eyes never leaving her face. "That contract meant you were willing to take a chance on building a life out here. It meant you were brave enough to leave everything you knew for the possibility of something better. Just because Marcus Doyle is a piece of trash does not mean I am going to let him steal what could have been." He paused, then added softly, "And yes, those contracts have legal standing if they are entered into willingly by both parties. You signed in good faith. I signed in good faith." What Marcus did was kidnapping, pure and simple. He stepped back from the coach and offered his hand to help her down. Diana hesitated, then placed her sore hand in his. His palm was warm and rough, and he steadied her as she climbed out into the bright afternoon. The landscape stretched around them in all directions, empty except for the road and the distant mountains. 2 horses stood nearby, one saddled and one carrying supplies. The stagecoach driver was nowhere to be seen. "Where is the driver?" Diana asked, suddenly worried. "Paid him to forget he ever saw any of this and sent him on his way," Vernon said. "He was happy to oblige once I mentioned that transporting kidnapping victims makes him an accomplice." Diana looked at the horses, then back at Vernon. He was watching her with an expression she could not quite read. There was concern there and something else, something that made her pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "Miss Diana Langley," Vernon said slowly, as if tasting her name. "I tracked you for 3 days. I killed 2 men to get you free, but I want you to understand something right now, before we go any further." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Diana recognized it as the contract she had signed back in Boston, the one that promised her to Vernon Lancaster as his lawful wife. He held it up so she could see it clearly, then tore it in half. Then he tore it again and again, until it was nothing but scraps. He let the pieces fall to the ground, where the hot Texas wind scattered them across the dirt. "You are free," Vernon said, his voice firm and clear. "Free to stay or go. I will not hold you to words signed in desperation back in Boston. If you want, I will take you to Shafter. There is a boarding house there run by a good woman named Mrs. Patterson. You can stay there while you figure out what you want to do. I will pay for your room and board for as long as you need, and I will help you get passage back east if that is what you choose." Deanna stared at the scraps of paper blowing away in the wind, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. "You are giving me a choice." "Yes, madam. But you paid for my passage. You went through all the trouble of finding a bride. You just killed 2 men to rescue me." Vernon's expression softened slightly. "I paid for your passage because I hoped you would choose to build a life here with me. I went through the trouble because it was the right thing to do, and I killed 2 men because they needed killing. None of that means you owe me anything, Deanna. You were taken against your will, shackled like a criminal and threatened with slavery. The last thing you need is another man telling you what you have to do." Tears burned in Deanna's eyes, hot and unexpected. In 22 years of life, no one had ever given her a choice about anything. Her parents had died when she was 6, leaving her to the mercy of an orphanage that treated children like inconveniences. She had worked as a maid, a seamstress, a factory worker, always at the mercy of employers who saw her as disposable. When she had seen Vernon's advertisement seeking a bride, willing to pay for passage and offer a home, it had seemed like a miracle. But even then, she had known it was not truly a choice. It was survival dressed up as opportunity. Now this man, this stranger who had every legal and practical right to claim her, was offering her something she had never truly had: freedom. "What if I choose to stay?" Deanna asked, her voice trembling. "What would that mean?" Vernon reached up and adjusted his hat, a gesture that seemed almost nervous. "It would mean you stay at the ranch as my guest until you decide if you want to marry me or not. No pressure, no obligations. You would have your own room, your own space. We would get to know each other like normal people do, not through letters and desperation. And if you decide I am not the man for you, or that this life is not what you want, then you are free to go with my blessing and enough money to start fresh wherever you choose." Deanna looked at him, really looked at him. He stood at ease in the harsh sunlight, one hand resting on his gun belt, the other hanging loose at his side. He was handsome in a rough, weathered way, but it was more than that. There was something in his eyes, in the set of his shoulders, that spoke of integrity. This was a man who said what he meant and meant what he said. "How far is your ranch?" she asked quietly. "About 3 hours' ride from here. We can make it before dark if we leave soon." Deanna took a deep breath, tasting dust and sage and the strange, wild scent of Texas. "I would like to see it. Your ranch, I mean, before I decide anything." The corners of Vernon's mouth lifted in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Fair enough." He walked to the second horse and began checking the straps. "Have you ridden before?" "Once or twice when I was very young. This is Rosie. She is gentle as they come. I will lead her until you feel comfortable." He helped Deanna mount, his hands steadying her waist as she settled into the saddle. The horse shifted beneath her, and for a moment Deanna gripped the pommel in panic, but Rosie just turned her head and regarded her with calm, dark eyes. Vernon handed her the reins, showing her how to hold them properly. "Just relax. Let her feel that you trust her." Vernon mounted his own horse, a large bay gelding with intelligent eyes. He kept his word. leading Rosie at a slow walk until Deanna found her balance and began to relax into the rhythm of the horse's movements. They left the abandoned stagecoach behind, heading northwest along a narrow trail that wound through the scrubland. For a long time, they rode in silence. The sun beat down mercilessly, and Diana was grateful for the bonnet she wore, though it did little to protect her from the heat. Vernon seemed unbothered by the temperature, sitting easy in his saddle as if he were part of the horse itself. Occasionally, he would point out landmarks, a distinctive rock formation or a particularly large mesquite tree, orienting her to the landscape. "How long have you lived out here?" Deanna asked eventually, her curiosity overcoming her uncertainty. "Born and raised in Virginia," Vernon said. "Came to Texas after the war. That was in '66, so 12 years now." "The war," Deanna repeated softly. She had been just a child during the Civil War, but she remembered the older girls at the orphanage crying when news of deaths reached them. "You fought?" "Yes, madam." "Confederate cavalry, though I was not fighting for slavery. My family did not own slaves, and I thought the whole institution was evil. I fought because Virginia was my home, and when your home is invaded, you defend it. Stupid, young reasons. The kind of reasons that get boys killed." There was something in his voice, a weight that spoke of memories he carried but did not share. Deanna did not press. Instead, she asked, "Why Texas?" "After the war, there was nothing left in Virginia for me. My parents had died during the conflict. My home was burned. I heard there was land to be had out west, opportunities for men willing to work hard. So I came to Texas, hired on as a ranch hand, learned the trade, and saved every penny. About 5 years ago, I bought my own spread. It is not much, but it is mine." "What made you decide you wanted a wife?" Vernon was quiet for a moment, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "Loneliness, I suppose. A ranch is a lot of work for one man, but it is more than that. At the end of the day, when the work is done and the sun goes down, there is just silence. I found myself talking to the horses and the cattle, just to hear a voice. Thought maybe it was time to build something more than just a successful ranch. Thought maybe it was time to build a home." Deanna felt something shift in her chest, a recognition of shared loneliness. "I understand that feeling. The silence, I mean." Vernon turned to look at her, his gray-green eyes searching her face. "What made you answer my advertisement? There must have been others." "There were," Deanna admitted, "but yours was different. Most of the advertisements talked about what the men wanted, what they required in a wife. Yours talked about partnership, about building something together. It sounded like you were looking for a person, not just a housekeeper or a brood mare." "That is because I was," Vernon said simply. "Still am, if you decide to stay." The trail began to climb, winding up into rocky hills dotted with juniper and pinyon pine. The air grew slightly cooler, and Diana caught the scent of water. Vernon led them around a bend, and suddenly the landscape opened up before them. A valley spread out below, green with grass and crossed by a ribbon of silver water. In the distance, nestled against a rocky outcropping, stood a house built of adobe and rough-hewn timber. It was not large, but it looked solid and well-maintained. Beyond it, Deanna could see corrals and a barn and cattle grazing in the pastures. "That is home," Vernon said quietly. "The Lancaster Ranch." Deanna could not speak. The ranch was beautiful in a stark, honest way. It looked like it belonged to the landscape, growing out of the earth rather than imposed upon it. As they descended into the valley, she saw more details. A vegetable garden struggling valiantly against the harsh climate. A chicken coop. A windmill turning lazily in the breeze, pulling water from deep beneath the ground. Vernon helped her dismount in front of the house, and for the first time, Deanna realized how exhausted she was. Her body ached from days of rough travel, her wrists throbbed, and her head felt light. She swayed slightly, and Vernon was there instantly, his arm around her waist. "Easy. When did you last eat?" "Yesterday morning, I think." Marcus did not believe in feeding his property regularly. Vernon's jaw clenched, but he just nodded and guided her toward the house. The interior was dim and cool after the bright sunlight. Deanna had a vague impression of rough wooden furniture, a stone fireplace, and windows covered with simple curtains. Vernon led her to a chair at a sturdy table and made her sit. "Stay here. I will get you water and food." He moved with efficient purpose, pumping water from a sink, slicing bread and cheese, pulling jerky from a jar. Within minutes, he set a plate and a full glass before her. Deanna drank the water in long, desperate gulps, then forced herself to eat slowly despite her hunger. Vernon watched her for a moment, then seemed satisfied and went to work on her wrists. He brought out a basin of clean water, some cloth, and a small jar of salve. His hands were gentle as he cleaned the raw skin, his touch almost reverent. Deanna watched his face as he worked, noting the concentration, the slight furrow between his eyebrows. When he applied the salve, cool and soothing, she could not help but sigh in relief. "This will help them heal faster," Vernon said, wrapping her wrists with soft bandages. "You should keep them covered for a few days." "Thank you," Deanna whispered. Vernon met her eyes and something passed between them, something electric and new. "You are welcome." He showed her the rest of the house after she had eaten. It was simple but comfortable. The main room served as both living area and kitchen. There were 2 bedrooms, one clearly Vernon's and one that he said would be hers. The guest room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a wardrobe, and a window that looked out over the valley. Fresh linens were folded on the bed, and there was even a vase of dried wildflowers on the small table. "I prepared this room when I was expecting you to arrive," Vernon said from the doorway. "I will let you rest now. There is water in the pitcher for washing, and if you need anything, just call out. I will be nearby." Deanna sat on the bed, testing its firmness, and looked up at him. "Vernon?" "Yes. Thank you for finding me, for saving me." His expression softened. "Get some rest, Deanna. We can talk more when you are feeling stronger." He closed the door quietly, and Deanna was alone. She removed her dusty dress and washed with the cool water from the pitcher, gasping at the relief it brought. There was a simple cotton nightgown folded in the wardrobe, clearly purchased for her arrival, and she slipped it on gratefully. When she lay down on the bed, the pillow was soft beneath her head, and the blanket smelled of sage and sunshine. Deanna had meant to stay awake, to think about everything that had happened, to try to make sense of this strange turn her life had taken. But exhaustion dragged her down like an anchor, and within moments she was deeply, dreamlessly asleep. When Deanna woke, the room was dark except for a stripe of moonlight across the floor. She lay still for a moment, disoriented, her heart racing. Then memory returned, and with it the realization that she was safe. She was at the Lancaster ranch in a comfortable bed, and the man who had brought her here had asked nothing of her except that she rest. Deanna sat up slowly, testing her body. Her wrists still hurt, but the pain was manageable. She was thirsty again and hungry, her earlier meal having barely made a dent in her depleted reserves. Wrapping a shawl around her shoulders, she opened the bedroom door and stepped into the main room. Vernon sat at the table, papers spread before him in the light of an oil lamp. He looked up at her approach, concern flickering across his face. "Did something wake you? Are you all right?" "I am fine, just thirsty." Vernon stood and fetched her another glass of water. Deanna drank it more slowly this time, savoring the cool, clean taste. She noticed that Vernon had changed clothes. He now wore a simple shirt and trousers, and his hair was damp as if he had washed recently. "What time is it?" Deanna asked. "About 10. You slept for 6 hours." "I did not mean to sleep so long. You needed it." Vernon gestured to the papers on the table. "I was just going over accounts. The ranch has had a good year, thankfully. The cattle are healthy, and I sold a herd last month for a fair price." Diana moved closer, curious despite herself. The papers were covered in neat columns of numbers, records of purchases and sales. "You keep your own accounts?" "I do. Never had much formal education, but I learned my numbers young. Out here, a man who cannot manage his own accounts is a man asking to be cheated." "May I?" Deanna gestured to the papers. Vernon looked surprised but nodded. Deanna studied the accounts, her eyes moving quickly down the columns. She had worked as a clerk for a brief time in Boston, and she had a good head for figures. Vernon's records were meticulous, every penny accounted for. "These are excellent," Deanna said approvingly. "Very organized. You know accounting, a little." "I worked in a dry goods store for a while, keeping their books. The owner said I had a talent for it." Vernon leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "That is a valuable skill out here. Most ranchers I know hate dealing with the numbers." Deanna set the papers down carefully. "Vernon, I need to ask you something." "Anything?" "Why did you really save me? I know you said it was the right thing to do, but you could have just reported Marcus to the law. You did not have to track me down yourself. You did not have to risk your life." Vernon was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming softly on the table. "When I got that letter from you, the one where you agreed to come, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Hope. You wrote about wanting a fresh start, about being willing to work hard to build a life. You did not ask for promises of wealth or comfort. You just asked for honesty and respect. That told me you were the kind of person I wanted in my life." He paused, his gray-green eyes meeting hers in the lamplight. "When I found out what Marcus had done, I was furious. Not just because he had stolen from me, but because he had taken someone who deserved a chance at happiness and treated her like property. I could not let that stand. I could not let you disappear into a life of misery when you had been brave enough to reach out for something better." Diana felt her throat tighten with emotion. "You do not even know me." "I know enough. I know you are brave. I know you are strong. I know you did not break even when you had every reason to. That is enough to start with." They looked at each other across the small table, the lamp casting warm shadows across Vernon's face. Deanna felt something unfurling in her chest, something fragile and new. It was not love, not yet, but it was the seed of what love could become. Trust, perhaps, or the beginning of it. "I would like to stay," Deanna said softly. "For a while at least, to see if this could work." Vernon smiled, a real smile that transformed his serious face into something almost boyish. "I would like that very much." The next few weeks fell into a rhythm that Deanna found both strange and comforting. Vernon was true to his word, asking nothing of her except her company. She had her own room, her own space, and he never pressed for more than she was willing to give. But they spent their days together, working side by side to maintain the ranch. Diana discovered that she loved the work, despite its difficulty. Vernon taught her to ride properly, patient with her mistakes and generous with his praise when she succeeded. She learned to care for the chickens, gathering eggs each morning and feeding them grain. The vegetable garden became her special project, and she coaxed struggling plants into health with careful watering and weeding. In the evenings, they would sit together at the table, talking about everything and nothing. Vernon told her about his childhood in Virginia, about his parents who had been teachers and had filled their home with books. Deanna told him about the orphanage, about the girls she had grown up with, and the harsh matrons who ran the place with iron discipline. She told him about her brief moments of happiness, about a teacher who had taught her to read beyond simple primers, about a friend named Sarah who had made her laugh even in the darkest times. Vernon listened to everything with complete attention, never judging, never dismissing her experiences. In turn, Deanna learned about his dreams for the ranch, his hope to expand the herd, his plan to build a better barn before winter came. She learned that he loved reading and had a small collection of books that he treasured. She learned that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh. One evening, about 3 weeks after Deanna's arrival, they were sitting outside watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Vernon had brought out 2 chairs and set them on the small porch that fronted the house. Deanna held a cup of coffee in her hands, savoring the warmth and the rich smell. "I have been thinking," Vernon said slowly, his eyes on the horizon, "about hiring some help. The ranch is getting to be more than I can manage on my own, especially with the expansion I am planning. There is a young man in Shafter, name of Thomas Wright, who has been looking for steady work. He is a good hand with cattle and honest as they come. I thought I might offer him a job, room and board plus wages." Deanna considered this. Would he live here at the ranch? There is a small bunkhouse out behind the barn. It needs some fixing up, but it is sound. He could stay there. "That sounds like a good idea. You work too hard as it is." Vernon turned to look at her, his expression serious. "I wanted to talk to you about it first. I know you are still getting used to things here, and I did not want you to feel uncomfortable with a stranger on the property." Diana was touched by his consideration. "I appreciate that, but Vernon, this is your ranch. You should hire who you need to hire." "It is not just my ranch," Vernon said quietly. "Or at least, I hope it will not be someday. I hope it will be ours." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Deanna's heart beat faster. "Vernon, I am not asking for an answer now," Vernon said quickly. "I know it has only been a few weeks, but I want you to know where my heart is, Deanna. I want you to stay. Not as a guest, not as a hired hand, but as my wife, as my partner in all things." Deanna set down her coffee cup with trembling hands. "I think I want that too," she whispered. "But I am afraid." "Of what?" "Of making a mistake, of choosing wrong, of ending up like I was before, powerless and trapped." Vernon reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand gently, careful of her still healing wrists. "If you marry me, you will never be powerless. I will deed half the ranch to you, legal and binding. What is mine will be yours in writing, so that no matter what happens, you will always have security. And if I ever make you feel trapped, if I ever fail to honor you as you deserve, then you can take your half and leave, and I will not contest it." Deanna looked down at their joined hands, his large and calloused, hers smaller and marked with the fading scars of shackles. "You would do that? Sign over half your ranch?" "I would sign over all of it if that is what it took for you to feel safe." Tears spilled down Deanna's cheeks. "I do not need all of it, but the offer, the gesture, it means more to me than I can say." Vernon squeezed her hand gently. "Take all the time you need to decide. I will wait." But Diana realized she did not need more time. These weeks with Vernon had shown her the kind of man he was. Honest, hardworking, gentle despite his strength. He had never once raised his voice to her, never made her feel small or stupid. He had taught her with patience, listened with interest, and treated her as an equal. More than that, she had come to look forward to seeing him each morning. Her heart lifted when he smiled at her. She found herself thinking about him when they were apart, wondering what he was doing, eager to share some thought or observation with him. This was not the desperate transaction she had imagined when she answered his advertisement. This was real. This was love, or the beginning of it, growing strong and true in the harsh Texas soil. "I do not need more time," Deanna said, her voice steady despite her tears. "I want to marry you, Vernon Lancaster. I want to build a life here with you." Vernon's eyes widened, and then he was pulling her gently from her chair, into his arms. He held her carefully, as if she were something precious and breakable, and Deanna wrapped her arms around his waist and held on tight. He smelled of leather and horses, and the clean, dry scent of the ranch. She felt his heart beating strong and steady beneath her cheek. "Are you certain?" Vernon asked, his voice rough with emotion. "I am certain." Vernon pulled back just enough to look down at her face. His hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb gently wiping away her tears. "Deanna Langley, you have made me happier than I thought possible." "Soon to be Deanna Lancaster," she said, smiling through her tears. Vernon's expression grew serious. "May I kiss you?" Deanna's breath caught. "Yes." He leaned down slowly, giving her time to change her mind, but Deanna rose on her toes to meet him. His lips were soft and warm against hers, gentle but sure. The kiss was sweet and unhurried, a promise of more to come. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, and Vernon's eyes had darkened to the color of storm clouds. "We should go into town tomorrow," Vernon said, his voice husky. "Get you a proper ring, talk to the minister about a wedding." Deanna nodded, not trusting her voice. Vernon kept his arm around her as they stood on the porch, watching the last light fade from the sky. Stars began to emerge, scattered like diamonds across the vast Texas darkness. Deanna had never felt more at peace, more hopeful about the future. The next morning they rode into Shafter together. The town was small but bustling, with a main street lined with businesses and homes. Vernon pointed out the general store, the saloon, the church, and the boarding house run by Mrs. Patterson. He had sent word ahead about their arrival, and the minister, a kind-faced man named Reverend Samuel Hayes, was expecting them. Reverend Hayes greeted them warmly in front of the small white church. "Vernon, good to see you, and this must be Miss Langley." "Deanna, please," she said, shaking his offered hand. "Vernon sent me a message explaining the situation. I must say, I am very glad things worked out as they did. Marcus Doyle has been a thorn in this community's side for years. It is good to know he has been run out of the territory." They discussed wedding plans in the cool interior of the church. Reverend Hayes suggested a ceremony in 2 weeks, giving them time to prepare and allowing him to post the banns as tradition required. Deanna agreed, though a part of her wanted to marry Vernon immediately to make their union official before anything could come between them. After meeting with the Reverend, Vernon took Deanna to the general store. The proprietor, a cheerful woman named Mrs. Anderson, fussed over Deanna, showing her fabrics and ready-made dresses. Deanna chose a simple but beautiful dress in pale blue, along with some practical clothing for work around the ranch. Vernon also insisted on buying her a sturdy pair of boots, a good hat, and a warm coat for the coming winter. At the jeweler, a tiny shop squeezed between the saloon and a lawyer's office, they looked at rings. Most were simple bands, but one caught Deanna's eye. It was gold, delicate, with a small blue stone set in the center. "That is turquoise," the jeweler explained. "Mined right here in Texas. That particular stone came from a mine up near the Chinati Mountains." Vernon saw Deanna looking at it and immediately asked the jeweler to size it. Despite her protests about the expense, he insisted, and soon the ring was slipped onto her finger, fitting perfectly. Deanna looked down at it, marveling at the way the blue stone caught the light. "It is beautiful," she breathed. "Not as beautiful as the woman wearing it," Vernon said, and Deanna blushed to the roots of her hair. They had lunch at the boarding house, and Deanna met Mrs. Patterson, a widow in her 50s with a warm smile and sharp eyes. She embraced Deanna like a long-lost daughter and insisted they sit down to a proper meal. "I am so glad you are here," Mrs. Patterson said, ladling stew into bowls. "Vernon has been alone too long. A good man like him needs a good woman to share his life." "I am the lucky one," Deanna said, glancing at Vernon. "He saved my life." Mrs. Patterson nodded knowingly. "I heard about that business with Marcus Doyle. Nasty piece of work, that one. Vernon did this whole town a favor by running him off. And those 2 men who worked for him, well, they got what they deserved." Deanna learned that news traveled fast in small towns. Everyone seemed to know about her rescue, about the upcoming wedding, about her arrival as a mail-order bride. But there was no judgment in their eyes, only curiosity and, for the most part, warmth. On the ride back to the ranch, Deanna felt lighter than she had in years. She had a future now. A real future, with a man she was coming to love, in a place that felt more like home with each passing day. "Happy?" Vernon asked, glancing over at her. "Very," Deanna replied honestly. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Vernon hired Thomas Wright, the young ranch hand he had mentioned, and the young man proved to be everything Vernon had promised. He was perhaps 20, with sandy hair and an easy smile, and he worked hard without complaint. Deanna appreciated his respectful demeanor and the way he called her madam without a trace of mockery. With Thomas handling more of the daily ranch work, Vernon had time to make improvements to the house. He built new shelves in the kitchen, repaired a leak in the roof, and even constructed a small bench beneath a cottonwood tree near the creek. Deanna worked on the interior, sewing curtains and cushions, cleaning and organizing, making the house feel more like a home. Mrs. Patterson came out to the ranch twice, bringing other women from town. They helped Deanna prepare for the wedding, offering advice and assistance. A woman named Helen Johnson, who ran the town's small dressmaking shop, helped Deanna alter the blue dress to fit perfectly. Another woman, young and pretty with dark hair, introduced herself as Rebecca Martinez and offered to bake a cake for the wedding celebration. Deanna was overwhelmed by their kindness, by their acceptance of her into their community. In Boston, she had been invisible, just another poor girl struggling to survive. Here, she mattered. Her happiness mattered. It was a feeling she could hardly comprehend. The night before the wedding, Vernon and Deanna sat on their usual spot on the porch, watching the stars emerge. Vernon had moved out to the bunkhouse with Thomas, observing propriety until after the ceremony. Deanna missed his presence in the house, the sounds of him moving around, the comfort of knowing he was near. "Nervous?" Vernon asked. "A little," Deanna admitted. "Are you?" "Terrified," Vernon said, and when Deanna looked at him in surprise, he grinned. "I have faced down stampedes, rattlesnakes, and armed outlaws without breaking a sweat. But the thought of standing up in front of the whole town tomorrow and promising to be a good husband to you, that scares me more than anything." Deanna reached across and took his hand. "You are already a good man, Vernon. That is all I need." Vernon lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "I promise to spend the rest of my life being worthy of you. You already are." They sat in comfortable silence until the night grew cold, and then Vernon walked Deanna to the door. He kissed her forehead, a chaste gesture that nonetheless made her shiver with anticipation. "Tomorrow you will be my wife," Vernon said softly. "Tomorrow you will be my husband," Deanna replied. The wedding took place at noon in the small church on Shafter's Main Street. The building was packed with townspeople, more than Deanna had expected. Reverend Hayes stood at the altar, beaming. Mrs. Patterson sat in the front row, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Thomas Wright stood beside Vernon as his best man. Looking proud and a bit nervous in a borrowed suit, Diana walked down the aisle alone, carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers that Rebecca Martinez had gathered that morning. She wore the blue dress, which fit her perfectly, and her hair was arranged in soft curls courtesy of Helen Johnson's skilled hands. The turquoise ring sparkled on her finger, but Diana only had eyes for Vernon. He stood at the altar in a dark suit she had never seen before, his hair neatly combed, his face clean-shaven. When he saw her, his entire expression softened with wonder, and Diana felt her heart swell with love. The ceremony was simple and traditional. Reverend Hayes spoke of love and commitment, of partnership and faith. Vernon spoke his vows in a clear, strong voice, promising to love and cherish Diana for all his days. When it was Diana's turn, her voice shook with emotion, but she meant every word. "I promise to stand by your side, to be your partner in all things, to love you with all my heart, for as long as I live." Vernon produced a second ring, a gold band to match her own, and slipped it onto her finger. Then Reverend Hayes pronounced them husband and wife, and Vernon kissed her to the sound of cheers and applause from the congregation. The celebration afterward was held at the boarding house. Mrs. Patterson had prepared a feast, and Rebecca's cake was a work of art, 3 layers tall and decorated with delicate flowers made of icing. Diana and Vernon cut it together, their hands joined on the knife, and fed each other the first bites while everyone laughed and clapped. Diana danced with Vernon to music played on a fiddle by an old cowboy named Jack who, it turned out, was surprisingly talented. She danced with Thomas, who was sweet and shy, and told her that Vernon was the luckiest man in Texas. She danced with Reverend Hayes, who gave her his blessing and told her she was a lovely bride. As the afternoon stretched into evening, Vernon caught Diana's eye across the room. He tilted his head toward the door, a question in his eyes. Diana nodded, understanding. They slipped away from the celebration, retrieved their horses from the stable behind the boarding house, and rode home in the golden light of sunset. The ranch looked peaceful and welcoming as they approached. Thomas had agreed to stay in town for the night, giving them privacy. Vernon helped Diana dismount and then swept her up into his arms, carrying her across the threshold of their home. Diana laughed, her arms around his neck, her heart racing with anticipation and joy. Vernon set her down gently just inside the door, and for a moment they just looked at each other. Then Diana reached up and pulled his face down to hers, kissing him with all the passion and love she had been holding back. Vernon responded immediately, his arms coming around her, pulling her close. The kiss deepened, and Diana felt heat flooding through her body. "Are you certain?" Vernon asked, his voice rough. "We can wait if you are not ready." "I am your wife," Diana said softly, "and I love you. I am ready." Vernon's eyes darkened. He took her hand and led her to the bedroom they would now share, the one that had been his but would now be theirs. Moonlight streamed through the window, bathing everything in silver light. Vernon's hands were gentle as he helped her out of the blue dress, his touch reverent. Diana was not afraid. This was Vernon, her husband, the man who had saved her and honored her and chosen her. She trusted him completely. Their wedding night was everything Diana had hoped and more. Vernon was patient and tender, making sure she felt nothing but pleasure. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Diana's head on Vernon's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. His hand traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder, and Diana felt utterly content. "I love you," Vernon murmured into her hair. "I love you too," Diana whispered back. Life on the ranch settled into a new rhythm after the wedding. Diana was no longer a guest but a full partner, and she threw herself into her work with renewed purpose. Vernon kept his promise, deeding half the ranch to her in a legal document filed with the county. Deanna held the papers in her hands and cried, overwhelmed by the reality of it. She owned something. She had security. She had a home that could never be taken from her. The days grew shorter as autumn approached. Deanna and Vernon worked side by side, preparing for winter. They harvested the vegetables from the garden, storing what they could in the root cellar. They repaired fences and checked the cattle, making sure the herd was healthy. Thomas proved invaluable, his youth and energy making difficult jobs easier. In the evenings, Diana and Vernon would retire to their room early, eager for the privacy and intimacy of their shared bed. Their passion for each other only grew stronger with time, and Diana discovered pleasures she had never imagined existed. Vernon was an attentive lover, learning what she liked, what made her gasp and sigh. In his arms, Deanna felt beautiful and desired and loved. As the weather cooled, Deanna began to notice changes in her body. She was tired more often, and certain smells made her nauseous. Her monthly courses, usually reliable, did not come. At first, she tried to dismiss it, but when another month passed, she could no longer deny the truth. She was with child. Diana told Vernon on a crisp October evening as they sat by the fire. She had been nervous, unsure how he would react, but she should have known better. Vernon's face lit up with pure joy. He pulled her into his arms and held her tight, laughing and thanking her and telling her over and over how happy she had made him. "We are going to have a baby," Vernon said wonderingly. "A child, our child." "Are you pleased?" Deanna asked, though she could see the answer in his face. "Pleased." "Deanna, I am beyond pleased. I am blessed. We are blessed." Vernon became even more protective after Deanna's announcement, insisting she not overwork herself. Deanna protested that she was pregnant, not ill, but she secretly appreciated his concern. As winter arrived, bringing cold winds and occasional snow, Deanna spent more time indoors, sewing baby clothes and preparing for the arrival of their child. The winter was mild by Texas standards, but there were hard days when the wind cut like a knife, and the work was brutal. Vernon and Thomas managed the cattle, breaking ice on water troughs and hauling feed. Deanna kept the home fires burning, cooked hearty meals, and waited for spring. In late February, during a cold snap that frosted the windows, Diana went into labor. Vernon rode like mad to fetch Mrs. Patterson, who had experience as a midwife, while Thomas stayed with Deanna, holding her hand and looking terrified. Mrs. Patterson arrived with 2 other women, including Helen Johnson, and they took over, sending the men outside to wait. Labor was long and difficult, hours of pain that seemed endless, but Mrs. Patterson was there, encouraging Deanna, guiding her, telling her she was doing well. And when the sun rose on a new day, when Deanna thought she could not bear another moment, the baby finally came. "It is a boy," Mrs. Patterson announced, holding up the squalling infant. "A healthy, strong boy." Deanna wept as they placed her son in her arms. He was small and red and perfect, with a shock of dark hair and a surprisingly loud cry. Vernon was allowed in moments later, and he stopped dead in the doorway, staring at his wife and child with an expression of absolute wonder. "Come meet your son," Deanna said softly. Vernon approached slowly, as if afraid he might break the spell. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at the baby in Diana's arms. Tentatively, he reached out and touched the tiny hand. The baby's fingers immediately closed around Vernon's large finger, gripping tight. "Hello, son," Vernon whispered, his voice breaking. Tears streamed down his face. "I am your papa, and I promise to love you and protect you for all of my days." Diana leaned her head against Vernon's shoulder, exhausted but happier than she had ever been. What should we name him? Vernon thought for a moment. What about Samuel? After Reverend Hayes. He married us and he has been a good friend. Samuel Lancaster, Diana said, testing the name. I like it. Samuel Vernon Lancaster. Perfect, Vernon agreed. The months that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and endless wonder. Baby Samuel was a good child, healthy and growing fast. He had his father's gray-green eyes and his mother's stubborn determination. Diana discovered reserves of strength she had not known she possessed, managing the household and caring for an infant with grace. Vernon was a devoted father, spending every spare moment with his son. He would hold Samuel for hours, talking to him about the ranch, about the cattle, about the dreams he had for the future. Diana would watch them together and feel her heart overflow with love. As Samuel grew, so did the ranch. Vernon expanded the herd, and with Thomas's help, they built new fences and improved the pastures. The Lancaster Ranch became known throughout the region as a source of quality cattle. Diana managed the books, her skill with numbers proving invaluable. Under her careful management, they began to turn a significant profit. When Samuel was a year old, toddling around on unsteady legs and getting into everything, Diana discovered she was pregnant again. This time, Vernon's reaction was even more joyful, if such a thing were possible. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing like a boy. Their second child, a daughter, was born in the spring of 1880 during a rainstorm that broke a long drought. They named her Grace, for the grace that had brought Diana to Texas and into Vernon's life. She had her mother's dark hair and her father's serious expression, and from the moment she was born, Samuel adored her. The years passed in a rhythm of work and love and family. Thomas married a girl from town, a sweet thing named Anna, who moved to the ranch and helped Diana with the children and the household. They built Thomas and Anna a small house near the bunkhouse, and Anna proved to be a wonderful friend to Diana. Samuel and Grace grew and were joined by two more siblings, a boy named James and another girl named Elizabeth. The house rang with the sounds of children's laughter, of running feet and excited voices. Vernon built additions onto the house to accommodate the growing family, and Diana filled those rooms with love and warmth. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Vernon took Diana back to Shafter for a celebration. They left the children with Anna and Thomas and spent the night at the boarding house, in the same room where they had danced at their wedding celebration. Mrs. Patterson, now retired and living with her daughter, came to visit them, and they reminisced about that day a decade ago. I knew you two were meant for each other the moment I saw you, Mrs. Patterson said, smiling. Vernon had that look in his eyes, like he had found something precious he thought he had lost. I had, Vernon said, taking Diana's hand. I found everything I had been looking for and more. That night, alone in their room, Vernon and Diana made love with the passion and familiarity of a long marriage. Afterward, Diana lay in Vernon's arms, tracing the scar on his forehead with her finger. You remember the day we met? Diana asked softly. Every detail, Vernon replied. You were sitting in that stagecoach, shackled and bruised, but you still held your head high. I knew then that you were strong. I knew you were special. You broke my chains and told me I was free to stay or go, Diana said. That was the moment I knew I loved you, or would come to love you. You gave me the one thing I had never had, a choice. Vernon kissed her forehead, and you chose me. Every day since you have chosen me, I never take that for granted, Diana, never. And I never will, Diana promised. You are my home, Vernon Lancaster, you and the children and the ranch. This life we have built together, it is everything I never knew I could have. They held each other in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the town settling for the night. In the morning, they would return to the ranch, to their children and their responsibilities. But for now, they were just Vernon and Deanna, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. More years passed, each bringing new joys and challenges. Samuel grew into a fine young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Grace became a skilled horsewoman, able to ride as well as any cowboy. James showed an aptitude for numbers like his mother, while Elizabeth inherited her father's gentle way with animals. Vernon's hair began to gray at the temples, and lines appeared at the corners of his eyes from squinting into the sun. Deanna found silver threads in her own dark hair, and her hands bore the marks of years of work. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the young man who had broken chains and the young woman who had chosen freedom. On a warm evening in the summer of 1893, when Samuel was 18 and newly engaged to a girl from town, when Grace was 15 and full of dreams, when James was 12 and Elizabeth was 9, the whole family gathered on the porch to watch the sunset. Vernon sat with Deanna beside him, their hands clasped, while the children talked and laughed around them. "Papa," Elizabeth asked, "tell us again how you and Mama met." Vernon smiled and looked at Deanna, who nodded. "Well, little one, it was back in 1878, 15 years ago. Your mama was the bravest woman I had ever seen." Deanna laughed. "I was terrified. Brave and terrified can exist together," Vernon said. "I saw her sitting in that stagecoach, and I knew my life was about to change." Samuel, who had heard the story many times, added, "And Papa saved Mama from bad men." "He did," Deanna confirmed. "And then he did something even more important. He gave me a choice. He broke my chains and told me I was free to stay or go." Grace leaned forward, her eyes bright with interest. "And you chose to stay." "I chose love," Deanna said softly, looking at Vernon. "I chose a future. I chose home." James, ever practical, asked, "And then you built the ranch together?" "We did," Vernon said. "Your mother and I, side by side. Everything you see, from the house to the herds to the fences, we built it together." Elizabeth, the youngest and most romantic, sighed happily. "It is like a fairy tale." "No," Deanna said gently. "It is better than a fairy tale. It is real. It is work and love and choosing each other every day, even when things are hard." "Especially when things are hard," Vernon added. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Deanna leaned her head on Vernon's shoulder. Their children continued to talk around them, planning futures and dreaming dreams, safe in the knowledge that they were loved and protected. "Are you happy?" Vernon asked quietly, a question he had asked 1,000 times over the years. "More than I ever thought possible," Deanna replied, a response she had given 1,000 times and meant every single time. The stars began to emerge, scattered across the vast Texas sky. Deanna thought about the frightened girl she had been, shackled in a stagecoach, uncertain of her future. She thought about the moment Vernon had torn up that contract and told her she was free. She thought about the choice she had made, to stay, to trust, to love. It had been the best choice of her life. Years continued to unfold at the Lancaster ranch, each season bringing its own rhythm and rewards. Samuel married his sweetheart, a bright young woman named Catherine, and they built a home on the far side of the ranch property. Within 2 years, they blessed Vernon and Deanna with 2 grandchildren, twin boys with mischievous grins and boundless energy. Grace, stubborn and independent like her mother, announced at 17 that she wanted to study at a teacher's college in San Antonio. Vernon was reluctant at first, worried about his daughter so far from home, but Deanna convinced him that Grace had inherited their courage and determination. Grace excelled in her studies and returned to Shafter 3 years later to open a small school, teaching children from the surrounding ranches. James took over managing the ranch's finances when he turned 20, his mathematical mind even sharper than Deanna's. Under his careful stewardship, the Lancaster ranch expanded further, acquiring adjacent land and diversifying into horse breeding alongside cattle. Elizabeth, the youngest, surprised everyone by developing a talent for veterinary medicine, learning from the traveling veterinarian who serviced the area and eventually becoming his apprentice. On Vernon and Diana's 25th wedding anniversary in 1903, the entire family gathered for a celebration that lasted 3 days. The ranch house, now greatly expanded with multiple additions, overflowed with children, grandchildren, and friends from throughout the region. Thomas and Anna, now parents to 5 children of their own and still living on the ranch, helped organize the festivities. Reverend Hayes, now elderly but still sharp-minded, came out from town to offer a blessing. "I have married many couples in my years," he said during the celebration dinner, "but none have embodied the true meaning of partnership quite like Vernon and Deanna Lancaster. They have built not just a successful ranch, but a legacy of love and integrity that will endure for generations." That night, after the guests had retired and the children were asleep, Vernon and Deanna walked hand in hand to their favorite spot beneath the old cottonwood tree by the creek. Vernon had built the bench there 25 years earlier, and over time he had expanded it, adding a canopy to provide shade and planting flowers around it that Deanna tended carefully. 25 years, Vernon said wonderingly. "Sometimes it feels like just yesterday I saw you in that stagecoach. Other times it feels like you have been with me forever." Deanna smiled, her face illuminated by moonlight. She was 47 now, her dark hair streaked with silver, her face marked by smile lines and the passage of time. But to Vernon, she was as beautiful as the day they met. "I know what you mean. I can hardly remember what life was like before you." "Lonely," Vernon said. "It was lonely." "Yes," Deanna agreed, "so very lonely." Vernon reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Deanna's eyes widened in surprise as he opened it to reveal a necklace, delicate gold with a turquoise pendant that matched her wedding ring. "Vernon, it is beautiful," Deanna breathed. "I had it made special," Vernon said, fastening it around her neck. 25 years deserve something special. "Though nothing could be as special as you." Deanna touched the pendant, tears gathering in her eyes. "I did not get you anything." "You have given me everything," Vernon said seriously. "A home, a family, a purpose, love beyond measure. I could ask for nothing more." They sat together on the bench, watching the moonlight dance on the creek water. From the house in the distance came the faint sounds of their family, their legacy, the life they had built together from nothing but hope and determination. "You ever think about that day?" Deanna asked. "The day you found me?" "Often," Vernon admitted. "I think about how close I came to losing you before I ever really had you. If I had been one day later, if Marcus had taken you just a bit further, I might never have found you." "But you did find me," Deanna said firmly, "and you set me free." "We set each other free," Vernon corrected. "You freed me from loneliness, from a life half lived. You gave me purpose and joy." Deanna leaned against him, feeling the solid strength of his body, the steady beat of his heart. "I love you, Vernon Lancaster. I have loved you since the day you tore up that contract and gave me a choice. And I love you, Deanna Lancaster. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." They remained there until the moon was high overhead, two people who had found each other in the harsh Texas landscape and built something enduring. The ranch spread around them, thousands of acres of land they had worked and loved and protected. The house held their children and grandchildren, safe and sleeping. The future stretched before them, full of promise. The years continued to pass, bringing both joy and sorrow. Reverend Hayes passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 82, and the whole town mourned. Mrs. Patterson followed him a year later, her sharp wit and kind heart missed by all who had known her. Thomas and Anna's eldest son joined the army and served with distinction, returning home decorated and proud. Vernon's health began to decline when he reached his mid-60s. His joints ached in the morning, and the hard work that had once been effortless became challenging. But he remained active, refusing to slow down completely. Diana, ever practical, insisted he delegate more to Samuel and James, but Vernon was stubborn. One spring morning in 1910, Diana found Vernon in the barn, sitting on a hay bale and breathing hard. She rushed to his side, alarmed by his pale face and the sweat on his brow. "Vernon, what is wrong?" "Just tired," Vernon said, but Diana could hear the pain in his voice. She helped him back to the house and sent James racing to town for the doctor. The diagnosis was a weak heart, the result of years of hard living and old war wounds. The doctor prescribed rest and medicine, and absolutely no strenuous activity. Vernon followed the doctor's orders reluctantly, and to everyone's relief, he improved. But the scare reminded Diana and Vernon both that they were no longer young. They began to make plans for the ranch's future, ensuring that Samuel and James understood how things should be managed, that all the legal documents were in order, that their legacy would continue. On a beautiful autumn day in 1912, as golden leaves fell from the cottonwood trees and the air carried a crisp hint of winter to come, Diana and Vernon celebrated their 34th wedding anniversary quietly. Their children had offered to organize a party, but Vernon and Diana requested just family, a simple dinner with those they loved most. After the meal, as the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and purple, Vernon stood and tapped his glass for attention. The gathered family quieted, all eyes turning to the patriarch. "I want to say something," Vernon began, his voice still strong despite his years. 34 years ago, I went looking for a woman I had never met, hoping to save her from a terrible fate. What I found was so much more than I had imagined. Diana, you have been my partner, my love, my best friend. You have given me a life beyond my wildest dreams." He turned to his children and grandchildren, who numbered 13 now, with more on the way. "And all of you, every single one of you, you are the fruit of that love. You are proof that something beautiful can grow even in the hardest soil, if it is tended with care and devotion." Diana stood and moved to Vernon's side, taking his hand. "Vernon gave me the greatest gift anyone can give another person. He gave me freedom, and then he showed me that love freely given is the strongest bond of all. Our life together has not always been easy, but it has always been worth it." Samuel raised his glass. "To Mama and Papa. May we all be blessed with a love as strong and true as yours." "To Mama and Papa," the family echoed, glasses raised high. As the evening drew to a close, and the family began to depart to their various homes on and around the ranch, Diana and Vernon found themselves alone on the porch, their customary spot. Vernon's hand sought Diana's, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. "Tired?" Diana asked softly. "A little," Vernon admitted, "but happy, so very happy." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. The ranch was quiet around them, settled and peaceful. In the distance, a cow lowed softly. A night bird called. The wind rustled through the grass with a sound like whispered secrets. "Diana," Vernon said quietly, "if I could go back and live my life over, I would not change a single moment. Not the war, not the hardship, not the loneliness, because all of it led me to you. Deanna felt tears prick her eyes. And I would not change anything either. Even the terrible parts, even Marcus Doyle and those shackles, because they brought me here to you, to this life. Vernon lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently, a gesture he had performed thousands of times but which never lost its meaning. You were worth everything, Deanna. Every risk, every fear, every challenge. You were worth it all. More years passed, bringing the world into a new era. The ranch adapted and thrived, incorporating new techniques and technologies while maintaining the values Vernon and Deanna had established. Automobiles became common. Electricity reached Shafter, and the world grew smaller and faster. Through it all, Vernon and Deanna remained constants, their love a steady beacon for their growing family. They became great-grandparents multiple times over, their descendants spreading throughout Texas and beyond. But the heart of the family remained the Lancaster Ranch, and the heart of the ranch remained Vernon and Deanna's love. On a warm spring morning in 1918, 40 years after they had first met, Deanna found Vernon in his favorite chair on the porch. He was 82 now, his hair white as snow, his face deeply lined. But his eyes were still that remarkable gray-green, and they still lit up when he saw her. "Good morning, beautiful," Vernon said, his voice rough with age but still warm. "Good morning, my love," Deanna replied, settling into the chair beside him. She was 66, her dark hair completely silver now, her hands marked by arthritis. But she still moved with grace, and her smile was as bright as ever. They sat together in the morning sun, watching the ranch come to life around them. Samuel, now 44, was directing some of the younger ranch hands in their tasks. Grace, visiting from town where she still ran her school, was playing with a group of great-grandchildren in the yard. James was in the office, managing accounts with the help of his eldest daughter. Elizabeth was in the barn, tending to a mare about to foal. We did well, did we not? Vernon said quietly. Deanna looked at the scene before them, at the thriving ranch, the happy family, the legacy they had built. We did very well indeed. Vernon reached for her hand, his grip weaker than it once was but no less loving. Thank you, Deanna, for choosing to stay, for choosing me. Thank you for giving me the choice, Deanna replied. Thank you for breaking my chains and showing me what freedom truly means. They remained there as the sun climbed higher, content in each other's presence. They had weathered 40 years together, through hardship and joy, through loss and triumph. They had built a life, a family, a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. Vernon lived another 3 years, dying peacefully in his sleep on a cool autumn night in 1921, with Diana's hand in his. He was 85, and he had lived a full, rich life. His funeral was attended by hundreds, the church in Shafter packed to overflowing with people whose lives he had touched. Deanna grieved deeply, but with dignity. She remained on the ranch, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, still active and sharp despite her 70 years. She lived another 12 years, watching her great-grandchildren grow, seeing the ranch continue to prosper, secure in the knowledge that what she and Vernon had built would endure. On a spring morning in 1933, Deanna passed away quietly in her sleep, in the same bed she had shared with Vernon for so many years. She was 77, and she died with a smile on her face, her last thoughts of the tall cowboy who had broken her chains and offered her freedom. They buried her beside Vernon beneath the old cottonwood tree by the creek, the spot where they had spent so many evenings together. The entire family gathered, now numbering in the dozens, to say goodbye to the matriarch who had loved them all so deeply. Samuel, now an old man himself, stood at the gravesite and spoke for all of them. Our parents gave us the greatest gift. They showed us what true love looks like. They showed us that freedom and commitment are not opposites but partners. They showed us that with courage and devotion, anything is possible. He reached down and placed a single turquoise stone on Diana's grave, matching the one that sat on Vernon's. "Thank you, Mama. Thank you, Papa, for everything." The Lancaster ranch continued for generations after, always in family hands, always run with the integrity and love that Vernon and Diana had established. The story of the mail-order bride who arrived in chains and the cowboy who set her free became family legend, passed down through the years as an example of true love and the power of choice. And if you visited the ranch on a quiet evening, when the sun was setting and the stars were emerging, you might catch a glimpse of two figures sitting beneath the old cottonwood tree by the creek. One tall and broad-shouldered, one smaller and graceful, their hands clasped together, their love eternal. Vernon and Diana Lancaster had found each other against all odds, in a harsh land that demanded everything, and gave back only what was earned through sweat and determination. They had built something beautiful together, something that lasted far beyond their years. They had proved that love, freely given and faithfully kept, was the strongest force in the world. Their story ended not with death, but with legacy. With children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their blood and their values. With a ranch that still bore their name and reflected their principles. With a love story that would be told and retold, inspiring others to choose courage, to choose freedom, to choose love. The mail-order bride who arrived in chains had found her freedom. The cowboy who broke those chains had found his heart. Together, they had found home.